Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1115 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. Now that you have, let's begin. Sorry and or you're welcome if I sound different today. We have a new mic, playing with it, seeing what it sounds like. But let's let this not disturb what was an absolutely incredible chapter of One Piece. I suppose it is fitting for me to start with a tangent. At its most basic heart, or its most basic level, the story of One Piece is a hero's journey. Luffy, despite claiming to not be a hero, is in fact written to be a hero. But more specifically, the story of One Piece is written and referenced and highly inspired by the novel from Joseph Campbell called A Hero of a Thousand Faces. But the basic premise, for those that aren't aware, is that Campbell compiled the legends, the stories, the myths of cultures from across the world. All of humanity's stories of heroes. And as he did so, he noticed striking similarities between these stories that have no way of influencing each other. But utilizing these similarities, he broke these stories down and organized them into a structure. He calls this the monomyth. I don't want you to think that Oda is the only person on Earth who's taken inspiration from this book, because it was a big deal. You can think of Star Wars as an example. George Lucas rigidly followed the hero of a thousand faces, to the point that nowadays it is sometimes criticized. But he operated under the correct assumption that all of these mythologies are essentially stories that resonated with people, passed down for eons. These were the stories that humanity itself fell in love with and individually perfected their telling. So copying the structure would lead to a story that people would like. And he was very right. Other documented examples of famous stories doing the same: Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King. Basically, Disney saw the dollar signs and was like, don't mind if I do. So around the time that Oda was designing and drawing One Piece, this was common knowledge. One Piece really began in like 1996, 1997, and we're talking about The Lion King being influenced here in 1994. So this is all around the same time when this started to pop off. But the Hero of a Thousand Faces, I think, is interesting for two distinctly different reasons. On one hand, of course, is what we've already discussed, which is the narrative organization. It describes how to tell a compelling but basic hero's story. But on the other hand, you have the individual mythologies themselves, their shared characteristics, not just for the sake of telling a story, but in the actual details of these stories and their fantastical elements. In chapter 99 of One Piece, the ambiguously and unnamed narrator of One Piece said this: "Legends that endure into the future were events that took place in the distant past." So A Man of a Thousand Faces was built off of the legends of cultures and civilizations from across the world. And through this quote, Oda is basically telling us that one of the core creative decisions that has shaped the story of One Piece is assuming that the legends of humanity actually occurred. The legends have a basis in reality. And so one of the common myths that is shared from cultures across the world is the Great Flood. You can think of the story of Noah and Noah's Ark, which is very relevant in One Piece because Oda alludes to it in Fishman Island. But these flood myths exist elsewhere. The ancient Sumerians and Gilgamesh, China, India, and even across the Pacific Ocean to Central and South America, the Mayans and the Aztecs, as well as the beliefs of native North Americans. There's more than this, obviously, and I don't have the time to really go in depth into the specifics of each of these mythologies, but basically, you can think of all of these cultures believing that there was an apocalyptic, a world-changing flood event that occurred in the past, and often there is one that is going to occur in the future. And I think that you can see how this relates to One Piece. We have our flood from the past, the water levels rising by 200 meters during the Void Century, and we have our flood in the future, predicted by Dr. Vegapunk. This is a classic legend shared between most of humanity that Oda has made real. But the cool thing about it, and I think the thing that sparks my imagination, is that it's obviously real now in the story of One Piece, but it might be real in actual history as well. These legends have a basis in reality. Full disclosure, this verges on real-life conspiracy theory territory, or just theory territory in general. But the truth is that we don't know. But there are some really, really cool, in my opinion, compelling ideas as to how the world could collectively experience an apocalyptic flood. And certainly clues to this exist within the geologic record. But essentially the root source of all of these theories is climate change. 20,000 years ago was known as the last glacial maximum, the peak of the Ice Age. And basically since that point, the world has gotten warmer. But this warmth hasn't been as steady as you might imagine it. Within the geologic record, there exists proof that the world suddenly got colder at certain points in time, within the span of like literally a generation of somebody's life. And then there's other times where the world warmed just as quickly. We're talking about shifts in global temperature as much as 10 degrees or more. But it should be noted that this affected certain parts of the world more than it affected others, and in some parts it didn't affect it at all. And I would say the leading theory is this has a lot to do with ocean currents. And if you're curious for more details about this, I suggest researching the Younger Dryas. Like, we know that these changes occurred for a fact. Really, the debate centers around just how cataclysmic were these events, and also what caused them. But if you imagine a world at this time covered by more glacial ice sheets. These ice sheets melting, forming things like the Great Lakes. This water draining into the ocean. Water levels rising rapidly as a result. Ocean currents responsible for regulating the temperature of the Earth, essentially warming the Earth being disrupted. You have the basis for speculation of world flood events, or at the very least, big floods in localized areas, to which humanity absolutely witnessed, and then passed these stories down orally. Leading to, you guessed it, the monomyth. Does all of this make sense? Do you see how I'm connecting all of these things? Sometimes I legitimately feel like I am speaking in poneglyphs. Like, to me, it's really cool to find a rationale for things like Atlantis, ancient civilizations buried under the sea. And straight up, we just know that this occurred, at least to some extent. Like, we found cities such as Pavlopetri, now submerged in the ocean. Water levels are absolutely rising by approximately 100 meters or 330 feet since the last glacial maximum. But anyway, guys, I don't want to bore you with the details. I know that this doesn't directly relate to the story of One Piece, but I just find it to be interesting, and I think this has definitely inspired One Piece. And I think that it's really cool to see that Oda is probably interested in the same things that I find to be interesting. He's effectively world building his fictitious world of One Piece around the world building of our current world, and how scientists are actively trying to make sense of it. But of course, Oda also baked in some use of mushrooms. But again, if you are interested, some supplemental things to look into is Lake Agassiz in North America, as well as the Black Sea. History has cool stories to tell. But like I said, this all interrelates with climate change. But when we're talking about climate change in the past, these are natural processes, not caused by humans. Over the last 2.5 million years since the Earth has been in an ice age, the climate is variable in a sort of cyclical way. The world freezes more, it then thaws, and patterns emerge. But of course, current discourse surrounding climate change has much more to do with the human factor. And this seems to be the angle that Oda has taken it in the story of One Piece. Vegapunk tells us explicitly in the chapter that the sea levels rose by 200 meters during the Void Century because of humans. My very strong guess is that there's going to be some natural process that occurs in the world of One Piece that humans are influencing or exaggerating. And let me tell you, it will not go well. If you want to find my theory about how the One Piece world works, I left it on my channel for brave adventurers to find. The insane secret of the One Piece world. Basically, I think that this theory still adds up incredibly well with the things that we're learning. My idea is that Oda has combined real-world climate change, discourse surrounding the burning of fossil fuels, as well as the use of plastics, which are derived from fossil fuels, with atomic weapons. Which frankly makes a lot of sense because these were two big things from when Oda himself was growing up. Like, it's almost a time capsule of the 70s and the 80s. Two of the biggest political things you could talk about during those times are the Cold War and climate change. Two things that people at the time commonly believed would lead to the imminent destruction of our world as we know it. Oda just put them together and then combined them with the monomyth of the world ending, the literal apocalypse. In the case of One Piece, the atomic weapons, aka the ancient weapons, are responsible for a rise in sea levels. It really is that simple, and their use will lead to Ragnarok. Although for this to work, the One Piece world itself needs to be built different. So in that, obviously we're gonna get some fantastical things. So I want to take this back to conspiracy theories. I think that Oda loves these things. So in the real world, we currently do not know of any ancient, lost, global civilization. However, theories of such a civilization do actually exist. So one thing that I think most people have heard through the grapevine or memes about, right, is like ancient aliens having lived on the planet Earth, responsible for constructing the pyramids. Like, there was a civilization that existed in our past that was highly technologically advanced, and they acquired this technology with the help of aliens. This theory also ties into the idea of pre-Diluvian civilizations, or in terms more people would understand, civilizations that existed before the Great Flood. I literally think that this conspiracy theory is One Piece world reality. In the world of One Piece, we have an ancient, advanced, and global civilization that is now gone, the ancient kingdom. And they're gone in part because of a great flood. This is a whole real world thing. And I understand that it gets controversial. I'm not intending to make it controversial. It's just simply evident that Oda is inspired by it. And I just think that that is incredibly cool. Also pretty hilarious. Regardless of whether or not these conspiracy theories are fact or fiction, the truth is that they are compelling to a lot of people. It inspires people's imaginations, much the same as the stories of heroes passed down through the eons across the world. So it's pretty natural to take these things and utilize them in a story. Make them real. Like, you gotta admit that that's a pretty genius idea. Oda is cooking. But yeah, I just wanted to explain this at the beginning of the video, because honestly, I feel like this is the most insightful thing that I can possibly say, without getting into the nitty-gritty of the actual details as it pertains to the world of One Piece. The ancient weapons are inspired by atomic weapons, and the way that they will destroy the world is effectively climate change. And the ancient kingdom is probably inspired by theories surrounding ancient aliens constructing the pyramids, all wrapped up in a legend of an apocalyptic event and its hero. So let's ground this a bit more in the actual One Piece chapter. Once again, I'm loving all the cutaways to the various characters that are watching Vegapunk's speech. Honestly, I think that Oda has a reason to pan to whatever character that he's panning to and have them say whatever it is that they're saying. Like, all of this is very intentional, and there's potentially things that we could learn about the character or what they might do in the future or what they might do with this knowledge. Like, an example that stands out to me in a way that you might find surprising is Nojiko. Like, this message from Vegapunk is going off about the secrets of the world. This is possibly the craziest reveal in known history. And this mad person leaves halfway through in order to tend to her orchard. This was so incredibly real, it kind of blew my mind. Because when it comes to everyday working class people, these things simply don't matter. What is Nojiko gonna do with this knowledge? How does it benefit her in any way? Girl just wants to eat. Listening to Vegapunk ain't gonna solve that problem. I also thought that the highlight of Miss Golden Week in the chapters potentially fuel for theories. She's wearing the apple hat, and I think that we've seen her wear this before in cover stories, but now with knowledge of Vegapunk, specifically that Stella Vegapunk had something similar going on with his head, you kind of want to connect these two characters, and Miss Golden Week doesn't actually say anything. It's a ... of like somebody who has thoughts that they're not sharing. I straight up don't think that it is too wild to speculate that Vegapunk and Miss Golden Week might actually have some sort of relationship. Tell me if this is too tinfoil or not, but I kind of wonder whether Vegapunk has like a network of informants around the world to, I don't know, inform him about whatever. We already know that Vegapunk is connected to Stussy, who is a member of CP0. It just starts to become intuitive to think that maybe other characters and other factions are also subordinate to Vegapunk. Maybe Miss Golden Week or Vegapunk thought that they might learn something by infiltrating Baroque works. I'm just saying. But anyway, let's dissect what Vegapunk actually said further. We continue in this chapter where the last one left off with the reveal that Joy Boy was a pirate. I thought that it was cool that we saw Momonosuke and the people of Wano be able to listen to this message and be able to comment on it, just because we know that Momonosuke has had a conversation with Zunisha. He is clearly familiar with Joy Boy's name. He also should be familiar with Odin's journal. But in all of that, he didn't know what Vegapunk just revealed. Vegapunk continues, however, and adds a clarification that he does not know the whole story. He only possesses a handful of poneglyphs, and I love that this is a thing. This means that Oda can be incredibly deceptive, and we just have to take it on the chin. Most likely what we are learning right now is not the full truth. It is a partial truth. There are specific facts within this that are true, but Vegapunk's conclusions or how he connects everything doesn't necessarily have to be the story. We obviously knew this before, but this means more future Void Century reveals, which I am here for. Gives us more time to speculate. But I still want to piece this together as best as I can, and I think that it helps if we combine what Vegapunk is saying now with what Clover told us during the Ohara flashback. So anyway, Vegapunk continues to say this: I only possess a handful of poneglyphs, but their combined narrative clearly chronicles an unbelievable history about a great war in the distant past. During that period, Joy Boy faced an enemy, the organization now known as the World Government. But back then they were merely the Allied Powers, a temporary coalition consisting of 20 separate kingdoms. So all this lines up straight up with what Clover told us in Ohara. The World Government of today were founded by 20 kings, later to become the families of the now Celestial Dragons. And these 20 kings were the enemy of Joy Boy. The Void Century ended with Joy Boy's defeat, meaning as far as we know, Joy Boy lost to the 20 kingdoms. And likely with this event, the advanced technology that that the world had known up until that point was lost. So this conversation brings us back around to the ancient weapons. Right now, there's an association between the ancient weapons and Joy Boy and the ancient kingdom. We are being led to believe that Joy Boy and the ancient kingdom possessed and developed these weapons, which I think makes sense. I know that some people out there might think to themselves, well, Poseidon or Shirahoshi the mermaid princess isn't a technology, isn't a weapon that was developed. She is an individual living person among a unique race. But given enough advanced technology, especially bioengineering technology, which we know that Vegapunk and Caesar and Judge Vinsmoke have been developing in the present story, anything is possible. The fishmen and the merfolk might be bioengineered. The powers of Poseidon might be bioengineered. I believe that you should also apply this to, for instance, the minks, as well as the three-eyed tribe. Whatever race in the world of One Piece has some sort of unique power, it might not be natural. That is what I'm saying. If you need to, think about Sanji, right? We know that Sanji is genetically engineered. He also spontaneously combusts in a way that no one else does. It's likely because of his genetic enhancements that he does that. So he's really no different than what we're speculating about these other races. They simply have different powers. And although this technology seems fantastical, I think it might be related to technology surrounding the devil fruits as well. With the devil fruits, anything is possible. And I think that likewise, with technology, practically anything is possible. But of course, you should be thinking about the powers of Poseidon being different, if for no other reason than its destructive capabilities. Whether this is the actual power itself is that destructive, or there's a particular way that it might interact with the world in order to create that power. It'd probably take too much time to elaborate on this thought, but I think it should just be understood that the world of One Piece seems to be sitting on shaky ground. When earthquakes cause the water levels to rise by 200 meters, it makes you wonder about, like, what is the ground that everyone is sitting on? So having mega colossal creatures at the bottom of the ocean potentially capable of moving the earth itself or in some way destroying this fragile earth, that makes some sense to me. Or maybe Poseidon's destructive capabilities are foreshadowed through Jinbei. We know that through Fishman Karate, Jinbei is able to influence sea currents, or currents in general. So just apply this on a bigger scale and you could potentially have some sort of catastrophic power. The Sea Kings can manipulate large ocean currents. That also makes some sense to me. But ultimately what Vegapunk is trying to convey to us is that the ancient weapons are responsible for the great flood of the past, and are likely going to be responsible for the continuation of this flood in the future. And so it's here that I feel like we begin to have some room to speculate. Joy Boy possessed the ancient weapons. Clearly, Joy Boy was friends with the mermaid princess of her era, Poseidon. He left her a poneglyph to say he's sorry. And it seems likely that the 20 kingdoms banded against Joy Boy in part because he possessed these weapons. They were aware of what they could do, or actively saw them being used, and experienced that calamity. But do we think that Joy Boy actually used them? Well, if Joy Boy is anything like Luffy, we know that he did not. This takes us back to Frankie's flashback. He created weapons that he did not intend to use. They fell into the wrong hands and were used anyway. This was the whole concept behind the blueprints of Pluton, that the makers feared the weapon falling into the wrong hands, so they created a countermeasure. Basically, it is incredibly likely that somebody, not Joy Boy, but associated with Joy Boy, acquired the ancient weapons and used them. Our theory for God knows how many years was that basically Joy Boy was betrayed. Joy Boy is Odin, and this other person is Orochi. So it is because of this Orochi-like character that the 20 kings collectively banded against Joy Boy. I think that they blamed Joy Boy for something that he did not do. But within this, I think that there's another important thing that needs to be speculated. Nefertari Lily was a member of the 20 kingdoms. And personally, right now, I'm assuming that Lily is very similar to Vivi, meaning she was a good person with a good soul. Therefore, the organization that she was a part of, or the alliance that she was a part of, was intended to do good. Vegapunk sort of explains it in the chapter, but he's not trying to arbitrate who is on the right side here, the good and the evil. He describes it as two philosophical differences. And what I think that you should be thinking is that to many people across the world, and probably to themselves, the 20 kings saw themselves and were heroes to the world legitimately. And personally, I think that the philosophical difference that Vegapunk alludes to is freedom. Remember, you should be thinking about the ancient weapons like atomic bombs. And a question I think that many people rightfully ask is, should we as humanity have the freedom to be able to utilize these weapons at all, if the consequence is potentially our entire world. Guys, the idea is that once these weapons were created, and their dangers known, just like the atomic weapons, they can't be unmade without drastic measures. Apply this to the real world right now. We are acquiring every day more atomic weapons. More countries are developing this technology. We're playing an epic game of Russian roulette. And I don't mean to fearmonger or cause panic, right? Well, this may not ever play out in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes or our children's children's lifetimes, but these weapons will likely continue to exist, and one day, enough time will pass, something stupid will happen. So I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description to another theory in which we basically speculate that Nefertari Lily and the 20 kings were comparable to the revolutionary army today. They were trying to save the world. And given what we've learned in recent chapters, it would seem likely that they were trying to save the world from the potential future use of the ancient weapons. Maybe the thought that they had is that the only way to prevent these weapons being used is for everybody to unify and come together. Essentially, the idea that they had that would save the world is the world government. That's one of the big concerns right now with the use of atomic weapons, is essentially the use of them will occur because of the world being fragmented. The United States and Russia aren't going to bomb themselves and every other place in the world if they are one entity. Outside of the means in which they attempted to or envisioned accomplishing this, it's a rational idea. The only way that we preserve our future is by coming together. But as you can imagine, and as we've experienced through the story of One Piece with the world government, the only way that you actually accomplish this is through authoritarian means or subversive measures. You do not give the people the freedom to say, I do not want this. You've decided what is best for them, and make it so. This heavily relates to something that Oda has planted throughout the story, that some nations did not want to join the world government, and still do not. So what happened to these nations? Let me tell you, horror happened. Unimaginable brutality in every conniving way that you could imagine. And through this, I think that you could imagine the irony of the current revolutionary army, especially if the current revolutionary army is based off of the past one, which is that they're actively trying to get nations to leave the world government. The world government which might have been founded in order to unify the world to protect it from a devastating future. It's quite honestly pretty hilarious. And because of that, maybe it's likely. But anyway, to make sure that I'm clear here, basically we're speculating that the reason for the war between the 20 kingdoms and Joy Boy was because of the ancient weapons. And this is straight up what the story has been implying most, since the moment that ancient weapons were introduced as a concept. People are not allowed to research the Void Century because of the ancient weapons. This is verbatim what the story has been telling us. And I know some other ideas exist, particularly recently, that maybe they fought over, for instance, the Eternal Flame or the Mother Flame, like this great power source. I think that that could certainly be part of it. But to me, it doesn't fill in the blanks quite as well as the idea that they fought over weapons that were capable of destroying the world. They fought over weapons of mass destruction. But an interesting facet of all of this is that Joy Boy, who we believe to be like Luffy, essentially a good dude, I think that he probably saved the ancient weapons. He did not allow them to fall into the hands of the 20 kingdoms. And he also did not destroy them. In fact, the poneglyphs which he left behind point to their locations. So Joy Boy intended for somebody specific to find them in the future. So you gotta throw that into the recipe, right? Why would he do that? Especially as Vegapunk seems to be telling us right now that the ancient weapons were utilized to create an apocalypse during Joy Boy's lifetime. The sea rose by 200 meters. So on one hand, what Joy Boy did made a lot of sense, because we're talking about actual people involved here, at least with Poseidon Shirahoshi. Poseidon was likely Joy Boy's friend and a living being. Regardless of the danger that she posed to the world, Joy Boy surely wouldn't allow her to be killed. Most probably, like Luffy and like Roger, Joy Boy protected his friends. This is effectively the story of Nico Robin, sentenced to death not for a crime that she actually committed, but for a crime that she might eventually commit. But the conversation gets a little bit murkier when you're talking about weapons which might not actually be people. Of course, we don't actually know what Pluton or Uranus are precisely yet. They might be living beings just the same, and so this conversation becomes remarkably easier. Although I want to throw in a theory that we made many years ago about the Pluton being or having a Kilbautermount. Basically, we've already made a speculation that Pluton is a ship, yes, but it is also alive, and maybe also a member of Joy Boy's crew, like the Going Merry was foreshadowing all along. But for now, I'm assuming that they are actually technology, they are weapons, they don't have a sentience. So wouldn't the right thing to have done in that situation is dismantle them? Especially as we know that this technology was lost immediately after the Void Century. Part of me wonders whether all of this advanced technology, Joy Boy didn't actually want to lose it, because it was part of a Vegapunk-like plan in order to create a better future, a future with endless energy. He just couldn't figure out how to protect that from people who might use it wrongly. I'm honestly not sure if I have the entire answer for you guys, even an entire speculation. Maybe this just works better if all ancient weapons are essentially life forms. They are sentient. Poseidon is a mermaid, Pluton is a Kabouterman and also a member of Joy Boy's crew, and Uranus is maybe something like Kuma. You know how Oda has drawn Frankie as a literal battleship in his bounty poster? Could that be foreshadowing to the nature of Uranus? A person who has physically transformed himself into a machine. But like Kuma, their consciousness was taken. But essentially all of them were at some point in time Joy Boy's friends. Therefore, regardless of the danger that they posed to the world, Joy Boy protected them. Honestly, I think that this is pretty fire. We might make a standalone video just reiterating what I've said here, because I think that this is a cool thought. But let's bring this back to the chapter. Vegapunk speculates that the war during the Void Century is still ongoing. And I think that the core ideology at the heart of this war is the formation of the world government as a means to protect the world from the ancient weapons, as well as the destruction and or acquisition of these weapons themselves. But it's about here that we have another problem. We've been speculating that the 20 Kingdoms were the good guys. They were essentially the revolutionary army of their era. Nefertari Lily was a good person who had good intentions. It wouldn't make sense for her to be a part of an evil organization. But it's very clear that the world government today intends on using these weapons because likely Imu already has. So does Imu's intentions now indicate the intentions of the 20 kings during the Void Century? Basically, during the Void Century, the 20 kings intended on acquiring the ancient weapons so that they could use them. I personally don't think so. And I think the biggest clue of this is the fact that Nefertari Lily eventually betrayed the world government. She did not travel with the other celestial dragons to live in Merijois, and she did something to prevent the world government from acquiring Joy Boy's poneglyphs, and may have actively participated in their spread across the world, therefore preserving knowledge of the ancient weapons, the Void Century, and their locations. So basically, I think that Nefertari Lily, just the same as Joy Boy, was betrayed, and she came to realize it at the end of the war. Like, you gotta remember, this is a story about pirates, and what does Oda say about pirates? They will betray each other. Literally, we've speculated here, everyone betrayed everybody. The alliance of the 20 kingdoms began with good intentions. But at least one king, most likely Imu themselves, never intended to protect the world from the weapons. They wanted to use them. Then Imu gained control of the organization that Lily tried to help create. And so the world government as it is today is not what Lily intended or envisioned. This is the way that I make sense of it. Again, the incredible irony of Lily trying to save the world, ultimately leaving it more threatened than it was before. And I think that this is true in more than one way. Because if the TCB translation of this chapter is correct, then Vegapunk dated the time that the ancient weapons were actually used and the sea levels rose, exactly 800 years ago. Meaning the 200-meter rise in sea levels, the use of the ancient weapons occurred at the end of the Void Century, right as Joy Boy was defeated. So whatever it was that Lily was specifically aiming to acquire or to do, the result of this was apocalypse. And I think that this reiterates a message that is pervasive within the story of One Piece. War is not the answer. The 20 kings might have felt compelled for just reasons to declare war on Joy Boy, who was seen as the king of the world at the time. Similar to how the Revolutionary Army is now going to declare war on the world government. But this war will only breed more destruction. I think that it is very likely that history will repeat itself in the present story. Just like the Chronicles of Joy Boy, the great war that Vegapunk is describing, we are headed for another great war. And the world of One Piece might be cataclysmically affected by it. Although hopefully this story has a happy ending. I would expect so, and so they find some sort of solution last minute. Whatever that might be. But anyway, some closing thoughts that I have is that of course we learned that Joy Boy was born to the Advanced Kingdom or the Ancient Kingdom. And as a side note, this chapter seemingly confirms that the Ancient Kingdom is actually older than 900 years. It predates the Void Century. And it's clear that both Clover and Dr. Vegapunk are seemingly implying that Joy Boy was the king of the Ancient Kingdom, eventually, that the Ancient Kingdom became his kingdom. And maybe it works in a similar way as Odin and Wano. Odin being the shogun of Wano. Like for real, Odin both acquired this title by force. He conquered Curry, he won over everybody and his father as well to re-inherit the title, but ultimately it's also hereditary for Odin. So is it possible that Joy Boy is the hereditary ruler of the Ancient Kingdom? Certainly it is possible. And this would explain the ancient giant robot apologizing to him. But I don't want you guys to forget that we have more reveals in the future and that Vegapunk's record of the poneglyphs is incomplete. So I don't believe that there was just one great war. I believe that there was two. Joy Boy's story is essentially the future of Luffy's story, meaning that there are two inflection points. Joy Boy or Luffy's rise to power, becoming the king of the pirates, and then their later defeat. But I don't want to get lost in the sauce here. I feel like we've been lost in the sauce a little bit too much recently. All I really want to convey to you is that whatever we're getting here from Vegapunk isn't the entire story. So bear that in mind. I think that you should always view things through the lens of how it works as a story. And I think that Joy Boy had as much difficulty acquiring whatever status that he had by the time that the 20 Kings defeated him, as was the case when they defeated him, if that makes sense. This story spans 100 years. It wouldn't really make sense for it to have been easy for Joy Boy for all 100 of those years until the end. But what Vegapunk is seemingly describing to us is a story that only matters at the tail end of the Void Century. Another thing which this chapter tries to convince us of is that the reason that the Void Century is lost is because the world flooded by 200 meters 800 years ago. I also don't think that this makes sense. Like, in part, absolutely, it could be true. But you gotta remember that these kingdoms, like Alabasta for instance, maintained its history from before 900 years ago, a time span which should now include the ancient kingdom's existence. So it's really that the flood selectively targeted 100 years of history to completely erase. To once again use the Chewbacca defense, that does not make sense. So I don't think that the flooding itself completely accounts for the lost history. There's gotta be more. We're also still left with the lingering question of the Red Line, as well as the Grand Line. But if the oceans filled, the world of One Piece flooded by 200 meters all 800 years ago, then we basically know for a fact that the way the ocean currents worked in the world of One Piece changed. Like, for instance, the Calm Belt. There is no way that the Calm Belt existed 801 years ago. No way. So I think that this justifies community headcanon for a number of years that Joy Boy, or the world at the time of the Void Century, helped create the world as we see it now. They redesigned it. And it almost feels purposeful to juxtapose some of the things that Vegapunk is talking about here with the accomplishments of the Bald Gorosei, V Nostro. As Vegapunk is talking about the world reshaping, V Nostro is reshaping Egghead. I actually have a lot of thoughts about what V Nostro was doing during the chapter relating to my theory about how the One Piece world works and talking about Sky Cloud. V Nostro cuts the sky cloud and people fall from the sky, and all this stuff seems relevant to me, but I'm not sure how to word it, so I'm just gonna leave it there. But honestly, we haven't even talked about one of the major reveals that Vegapunk dropped in the chapter. We've talked about the rise and sea level 200 meters, but this accompanied the reveal that previously the world of One Piece was home to multiple continents. Only the tops of these continents remain as scattered islands. So because we'd already been thinking about the world flooding, this was kind of something that I think that I took for granted and didn't really impact me that much in the chapter, just because it's like, well, of course, like if the world has been steadily flooding, then previously the land masses were bigger, and if these were our islands now, maybe at some point they were connected. It's just kind of obvious. But a theory that we talked about from Mr. Morge recently was his idea of essentially originally the planet being Pangea. There was one massive interconnected supercontinent and not multiple continents, which is seemingly debunked with the reveal in this chapter. I haven't watched Mr. Morge's full theory, but I would wager that one of the big evidences for this theory is the fact that in Mary Joie today, we have Pangea Castle. The castle in Mary Joie, that is its name. And basically, I wouldn't rule out this theory either. Like, by the time that the Void Century ended, was the world separated into multiple continents before the ancient weapons were used and it rose by 200 meters? I think so. But we don't know when the water levels started to rise, any of the processes involved in that, and so it's possible that the water levels have been rising for a long time, and originally it was just Pangea. It's just an older story that Vegapunk is not aware of. Or if Pangea was never a thing, maybe this sheds light on the world government's ultimate goal. They want to create a supercontinent, a connected gigantic landmass, and maybe this was always the purpose of the Red Line. Like low-key, throughout this review, I think I've been basically speculating that Nefertari Lily and the world government originally basically wanted the One Piece. I guess that's basically what I'm saying. They just pursued it in the wrong way, similar to other characters in the present story who want the One Piece and are not Luffy. You could argue, for instance, that the supercontinent's purpose was to connect the world. But we're in the sauce again, so let's just wrap this up. Outside of everything that we've been discussing, the nuances of the One Piece world and the reveals of Vegapunk, the chapter itself was incredibly awesome. The action spliced between Vegapunk's words, everything going on, panning to the various characters. I love it all. It is so peak. Honestly, reading this chapter was a rush. I have some more to say about Venusdra. I'm actually going to withhold it from this review and probably save it for a standalone video because I think that there's something that Venusdra said in this chapter which requires some elaboration and is tied to speculations. So look forward to that. But overall, to see the Gorosei's desperation in this chapter, every word Vegapunk says sets them on edge. Was incredibly cool and satisfying in the right kind of way. But they remain intimidating as hell. The cutaway to Stussy and Kaku was kind of weird, but at the same time it was oddly fulfilling. This might just become my #1 ship in the entire series, Kaku and Stussy. I am rooting for it. But the fact that when she lost Vegapunk, she lost her sense of purpose, I don't know what I should say about that. I feel like I should say more, but I'm drawing a blank. Maybe we should be comparing Stussy to the ancient giant robot. Both were created using technology, and while Stussy has lost Vegapunk, the robot lost Joy Boy. Maybe we will learn in the upcoming chapters that the robot is similarly without purpose. At this point, you should definitely compare Stussy and Vegapunk to Doflamingo and Monet. Oda clearly intends for us to make that parallel. But I suppose the obvious point of the Stussy scene is to communicate to us that Edison will die. And we're left in a situation which is actually what I speculated from the very start of Egghead, which is, it seems most likely that only one Vegapunk will escape Egghead, Lilith. Another random thought that I had is that if the Labosphere is comprised of Sky Cloud, then wouldn't it make sense for the Sky Cloud to float? So as Venusdra cuts the Sky Cloud, right, we see it lift from where it's attached to the island. Is it going to rise into the sky? I feel like that's what's about to happen. But yeah, I enjoyed the interactions that we got between the crew, Jinbei, and Zoro. You know, you can always count on Oda, even when things are as tense as they have ever been, to throw in a joke here or there in the middle, just to whet the appetite. Like, I honestly think that Oda doesn't consider a One Piece chapter complete until he throws in the joke. And I think that ending the chapter with Imu was incredibly hype, but also a little bit disappointing, because we didn't really learn anything new. But it makes me wonder if a face reveal for Imu is coming soon. But anyway, guys, I think that is everything that I had to say about the chapter today. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Please let me know if you like my mic, you like how it sounds, or you don't. I'm just curious as to your opinion. If you're interested in checking out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.